She accepted his fortune to escape ruin, but the truth came at a price. When Lady Fiona Brennan chose duty over love, she saved her family's crumbling Irish estate and condemned the only man she ever loved to a fate worse than poverty. A desperate proposal, 2 men and 1 choice that destroyed 3 lives forever. Subscribe now, this story will break your heart. Rain streamed down the broken windows of Brennan Hall as the letter bearing the German seal arrived that October morning in 1871. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Fiona Brennan stood in what had once been the grand drawing room of Brennan Hall, watching water drip steadily through a crack in the ornate ceiling. Each drop fell with methodical precision into a tarnished silver bucket placed on faded Persian carpet, creating a rhythmic sound that had become the soundtrack of her existence. Drip, 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 like a clock counting down to inevitable disaster. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The fireplace stood cold and empty. They could no longer afford coal, and the remaining servants had been reduced to burning whatever fallen branches they could gather from the estate grounds. Even those were becoming scarce. "My lady," the voice came from the doorway. Mrs. Donnelly, their last remaining housekeeper, stood with her weathered hands clasped before her apron. The woman who had served the Brennan family for 40 years now looked as worn as the house itself. "Another letter has arrived, from the continent." Fiona's heart contracted. More creditors, no doubt, more threats of legal action, more reminders that the Brennan name, once synonymous with wealth and influence across 3 Irish counties, now carried the stench of bankruptcy and shame. "Leave it on the hall table," Fiona said quietly, turning back to the rain-streaked windows. Beyond the glass, the grounds of Brennan Hall stretched in overgrown decay. Gardens that had once hosted garden parties for 200 guests now grew wild with weeds. The ornamental lake had become a stagnant pond. The stables that once housed 20 thoroughbreds stood empty, their doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges. "Begging your pardon, my lady, but this one bears a different seal. German, I believe." Fiona turned sharply. German? They had no business connections in Germany. Her father's debts had been primarily to English banks and Irish landowners. She crossed the drawing room, her boots echoing on bare floorboards where expensive rugs had once muffled every footstep. Those rugs had been sold 2 years ago, along with most of the furniture, the silver, the paintings, and her mother's jewelry. Mrs. Donnelly extended the letter with trembling hands. The envelope was thick, expensive cream-colored paper that seemed obscenely luxurious against the backdrop of their poverty. The seal was indeed German, pressed in black wax, bearing a coat of arms Fiona did not recognize. She broke the seal with fingers that had grown rough from mending her own clothes and helping Mrs. Donnelly with household tasks no lady should have to perform. The letter inside was written in precise, angular script. "Lady Fiona Brennan, I write to you on a matter of utmost importance and delicacy. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Baron Friedrich von Reichenbach of Bavaria, a man of considerable fortune, acquired through investments in railway construction and industrial manufacturing across the German states. I had the privilege of making your late father's acquaintance during his visit to Munich in 1865. Lord Brennan spoke often and fondly of his daughter, praising your intelligence, grace, and strength of character. Though we have never met, I feel I have known you through his words. I am aware of the financial difficulties that have befallen your family since your father's untimely passing. I am also aware that you are unmarried, at the age of 26, with no immediate prospects. I am 42 years of age, a widower these past 4 years without children. I seek a wife of good breeding and character to manage my household and provide companionship. In exchange, I offer financial security, social position, and the immediate resolution of all debts currently held against the Brennan estate. I do not speak of love, for I believe such romantic notions are the province of youth and poets. I speak instead of practical arrangement, mutual respect, and the preservation of an honorable family name. Should you find this proposal acceptable, I shall travel to Ireland within the month to formalize our engagement. Your family's debts, totaling approximately £12,000, will be settled immediately upon our betrothal. I await your response with earnest hope. Baron Friedrich von Reichenbach. Fiona read the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper into her consciousness like stones dropping into still water. £12,000. He knew the exact figure. He had researched their situation thoroughly before making this offer. A marriage proposal from a complete stranger, a business transaction dressed in the language of matrimony. "My lady," Mrs. Donnelly's voice trembled with hope. "Is it good news?" Fiona folded the letter carefully, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced. Good news? A German baron she had never met was offering to purchase her like a commodity, to transplant her from Ireland to a foreign country, to bind her life to his, in exchange for solving the financial disaster her father's gambling and poor investments had created. And yet, £12,000 would save Brennan Hall, would restore the family name, would provide for the handful of servants who had remained loyal despite months of unpaid wages, would prevent the estate from being seized and sold at auction, scattered to strangers who would tear down the walls and plunder what remained. "I need time to think," Fiona whispered. She walked from the drawing room, through the entrance hall where portraits of her ancestors watched with painted eyes that seemed to judge her every decision. Her footsteps echoed in the emptiness as she climbed the grand staircase, its balustrade still magnificent despite the general decay surrounding it. In her bedroom, Fiona moved to the window seat that overlooked the eastern grounds. This had been her favorite spot since childhood, the place where she had read countless books, dreamed countless dreams, and watched countless sunrises paint the Irish hills in gold and amber. It was also where she had first kissed James MacLeod. The memory rose unbidden, sharp and sweet as whiskey. She had been 17, he 19. The second son of a Scottish laird whose lands bordered their estate, James had come to Brennan Hall during a summer visit. They had fallen in love with the intensity of youth, believing that passion could conquer practical concerns like money and social position. Her father had forbidden the match. James had no fortune, no prospects beyond a commission in the British Army. He could offer her nothing but love, and love, Lord Brennan had declared, did not pay creditors or maintain estates. 3 years later, her father died, leaving behind debts that dwarfed anything Fiona had imagined. James was serving with his regiment in India. They had corresponded faithfully, his letters filled with promises of eventual marriage once he had advanced in rank and saved enough to provide for her properly. But eventually was a luxury Fiona no longer possessed. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called. Mrs. Donnelly appeared, her expression troubled. "My lady, there is a visitor. Captain MacLeod has arrived from Scotland." Fiona's heart stopped. Then it began racing so violently she pressed a hand to her chest. "James, here, now," of all the impossible timing. "Show him to the library," she managed. "I shall be down directly." She caught sight of herself in the remaining mirror, a small square of silvered glass that had escaped being sold because of a crack across one corner. The woman who stared back looked older than her 26 years. Her dark hair was pulled into a simple knot, no maid to arrange it in the elaborate styles she had once worn. Her dress was 3 years out of fashion, mended at the seams, the fabric faded from repeated washing. Her face was pale, her green eyes shadowed with exhaustion and worry. This was what James would see. Not the vibrant girl he had left behind, but a woman worn down by poverty and responsibility. She descended the stairs slowly, each step bringing her closer to a confrontation she had not anticipated and was utterly unprepared for. The library door stood ajar. Through the gap, she could see him standing with his back to the entrance, studying the empty shelves where her father's book collection had once resided. Those books had been sold 8 months ago. He wore his military uniform, the red coat immaculate, his dark hair slightly longer than regulation. Even from behind, she could see that he carried himself with the confident bearing of a soldier who had seen combat and survived. Fiona pushed the door open. The hinges creaked. James turned, and the smile that lit his face was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Fiona. Her name on his lips was a benediction and a torture. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her, propriety warring with desire in his expression. "James." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "You did not write that you were coming. I wanted to surprise you." His Scottish accent, softened by years in England but still distinctly Highland, wrapped around each word. "My regiment has been recalled from India. I have 3 months' leave, and I—" He paused, reaching into his coat to withdraw a small leather box. "Fiona, I know I should have asked your father's permission before he passed. I know my circumstances are not what you deserve. But I love you. I have loved you since that summer when we were young and foolish enough to believe love was all that mattered." He opened the box. Inside lay a simple gold ring set with a small emerald. "It was my mother's," James continued, his voice rough with emotion. "It is all I have to offer, but I offer it freely. Marry me, Fiona. We shall live modestly, but we shall live together. I will provide for you as best I can. My brother has promised me a position managing one of his estates in Scotland. It is not wealth, but it is honest work, and it would be ours." Fiona stared at the ring, at the hope shining in James's eyes, at the future he was offering her. A cottage in Scotland, modest means, love and companionship, and the warmth of waking each morning beside a man who cherished her. And Brennan Hall would fall to ruin. The servants would be turned out without references or support. Her family's name would become synonymous with disgrace. Creditors would seize everything, and her ancestors' legacy would be auctioned off piece by piece until nothing remained. "James," she began, and heard her voice crack. "I cannot." The light in his eyes dimmed like a candle flame guttering in wind. "Cannot." She could not meet his gaze. Her eyes fixed instead on the ring, that small circle of gold that represented everything she wanted and nothing she could accept. "My circumstances have changed," she whispered. "There are debts, obligations, responsibilities I cannot abandon." "Then let me help bear them." James stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "We shall face them together. Sell the estate if you must. Release yourself from this burden. You do not understand." Fiona pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself, as if she could hold her breaking heart together through physical pressure alone. "The debts are £12,000. Your brother's estate manager position would take 30 years to earn such a sum. There is no solution save one." She forced herself to look at him, to see the confusion and dawning horror in his expression. "I have received a marriage proposal," she said. The words tasted like ash. "From Baron Friedrich von Reichenbach of Bavaria. He offers to settle all debts immediately upon our betrothal." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the rain seemed to pause, the entire world holding its breath. "A German baron." James's voice was flat, emotionless in the way of soldiers trying not to feel. "A stranger." "Yes." "You would marry a man you have never met? To save my family?" "Yes." "And what of us?" Now emotion crept back into his words, raw and agonized. "What of the promises we made, the future we planned? Those were dreams, James." Fiona's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. "And dreams do not pay creditors." He stood perfectly still, the ring box still open in his hand. She watched something die in his eyes, watched the James she knew retreat behind walls of military discipline and masculine pride. "I see." He closed the box with a soft click. "Then I shall not trouble you further with my inadequate affections. James, please." She reached for him, but he stepped back, putting physical distance between them to match the chasm that had just opened in their relationship. "I wish you every happiness with your baron, Lady Brennan." The formality of his address cut deeper than any accusation could have. "May his fortune bring you all the joy that my love could not." He turned toward the door, his movements precise, controlled, as if he were on parade rather than having his heart torn from his chest. "James, wait." Fiona's composure shattered. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You must understand. I have no choice." He paused at the threshold, his back to her, his hand on the doorframe. For a long moment, she thought he might turn, might fight for her, might offer some miraculous solution that would make this impossible choice unnecessary. Instead, he spoke without looking back. "We always have choices, Fiona. You have made yours. I must learn to live with mine." Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing through the empty hall, the front door closing with gentle finality. Fiona heard the sound of his horse's hooves on the gravel drive, the rhythm fading into the distance, until only the rain remained. She stood alone in the library, surrounded by empty shelves and ghosts of better days, holding the crumpled letter from Baron von Reichenbach in one hand, while her other pressed against her mouth, to stifle the sobs that racked her body. Outside, the rain continued to fall on Brennan Hall, washing away nothing, cleansing nothing, merely adding to the dampness and decay that had already taken root in every corner of her ancestral home. That night, Fiona sat at her father's desk and wrote 2 letters. The first, to Baron Friedrich von Reichenbach, accepted his proposal and requested his presence in Ireland at his earliest convenience. The second, to James MacLeod, was begun 3 times and burned 3 times in the cold fireplace. What could she say? How could she explain that duty demanded she destroy the only love she had ever known? In the end, she wrote nothing. Silence seemed the kindest cruelty she could offer. 3 weeks later, Baron Friedrich von Reichenbach arrived at Brennan Hall in a carriage bearing his family crest, accompanied by his solicitor and a chest containing £12,000 in bank drafts. Fiona met her future husband on the front steps of her crumbling estate, wearing her best dress and a smile that felt painted on. Friedrich was tall, broad-shouldered, with iron-grey hair and eyes the colour of winter steel. His face was handsome in a severe way, as if carved from granite rather than formed from flesh. He bowed with Prussian formality. She curtsied with Irish grace. They exchanged pleasantries in the drawing-room, while solicitors drew up papers that would transfer her life from one man's control to another's. Friedrich was polite, distant, proper. He made no attempt at false affection or romantic overtures. When he looked at her, she saw assessment rather than admiration, as if she were a piece of property he was considering for purchase, which she supposed she was. The betrothal was formalized within hours. The debts were settled within days. Brennan Hall was saved, its immediate future secured by German gold, and a bargain sealed in duty rather than desire. Fiona walked through her home that final week, before her departure for Germany, touching walls that had sheltered 5 generations of Brennans, standing in rooms where her mother had taught her to dance, her father had taught her to read Latin, her childhood self had dreamed of futures that looked nothing like this present reality. On her last morning in Ireland, she woke before dawn and walked to the ancient oak tree on the eastern border of the estate. This was where James had first kissed her, where they had carved their initials into the bark, young and foolish and certain that love conquered all. She traced those initials with her fingertips. JM plus FB. The bark had grown over them slightly, trying to heal the wound, but the letters remained visible. A scar. A memory. A ghost of what might have been. "Forgive me," she whispered to the morning mist, to the empty landscape, to the ghost of the girl she had been. "Forgive me for choosing survival over love." The oak tree offered no absolution. The dawn broke cold and grey, and Lady Fiona Brennan returned to the hall to prepare for her journey to Germany, to her new life as Baroness von Reichenbach, to a future built on the ruins of her only chance at happiness. She did not know, could not know, that her choice would destroy more than her own heart. She did not know that James MacLeod, broken by her rejection, would seek solace in reckless military service and dangerous assignments. She did not know that her sacrifice would set in motion a tragedy from which none of them would ever recover. She knew only that duty demanded she leave Ireland, leave love, leave everything she cherished for a cold German castle and a stranger's bed. As her carriage rolled away from Brennan Hall 3 days later, Fiona did not look back. She could not bear to see what she was leaving behind. Instead, she fixed her eyes forward, toward Germany, toward duty, toward a life that stretched before her like a prison sentence. The price of survival, she was learning, was the death of every dream. The journey to Bavaria took 8 days. Fiona sat in Friedrich's luxurious carriage, watching the landscape transform from the green hills of Ireland to the industrial sprawl of England, then across the Channel to the orderly countryside of France, and finally into the dark forests and mountains of southern Germany. With each mile, she felt herself becoming smaller, more distant from the woman she had been. Friedrich travelled in a separate carriage with his solicitor, maintaining proper decorum even though they were now betrothed. He joined her only for meals at coaching inns, where their conversations were polite, superficial, and carefully devoid of anything personal. He spoke of railway investments, industrial expansion, and the efficient management of his estates. She listened, contributed appropriate responses, and felt her heart growing colder with each passing day. They did not speak of love. They did not speak of expectations beyond the practical arrangements of their marriage. Friedrich treated her with the same courteous formality he might show a business partner, and Fiona found herself grateful for the distance. It made the arrangement bearable, stripped of pretense or false sentiment. On the sixth day, as they crossed into Bavaria, Friedrich finally asked her a question that pierced the wall of formality between them. "Do you regret your decision, Lady Fiona?" They were dining in a private room at an inn in Nuremberg. Rain lashed against the windows, and the fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows across Friedrich's stern face. His steel-grey eyes studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Fiona set down her wineglass carefully. Honesty seemed the only appropriate response to such directness. "Every moment of every day," she said quietly. "But regret does not alter necessity. My family's survival required this choice. I would make it again, even knowing the cost." Friedrich nodded slowly, as if she had passed some test he had set for her. "Good. I have no patience for women who cannot face reality. My first wife was a romantic. She believed love could sustain a marriage despite practical incompatibilities. She was wrong, and we both suffered for it. What happened to her?" Fiona asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too personal, too intimate for the careful distance they had maintained, but Friedrich did not seem offended. He simply stared into his wine-glass, his expression unreadable. "She died in childbirth," he said. "The child died with her. Both losses were the result of her insistence on romantic notions over medical advice. The physicians warned her that pregnancy was dangerous given her constitution. She refused to listen. She wanted to give me an heir, wanted to prove her love through sacrifice." His jaw tightened. "I would have preferred a living wife to a dead martyr." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Fiona understood then that Friedrich's coldness was not natural cruelty, but learned protection. He had loved once, lost catastrophically, and armored himself against ever feeling such pain again. "I am sorry for your loss," Fiona said. "Do not be. It was 4 years ago. I have made my peace with it." Friedrich drained his wineglass. "I tell you this, so you understand what I require from our marriage. I need competent management of my household, dignified representation at social functions, and companionship without emotional entanglement. I do not seek love, Lady Fiona. I seek partnership built on mutual respect and practical benefit. That is precisely what I offer, Baron von Reichenbach. Then we understand each other perfectly." They finished their meal in silence, two people bound by agreement rather than affection, preparing to build a life on the foundation of shared losses rather than shared dreams. 2 days later, the carriage climbed into the Bavarian Alps, and Schloss Reichenbach came into view. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. The castle rose from a mountainside, like something from a medieval tale, all grey stone towers and fortified walls, surrounded by dark pine forests that seemed to press in from every direction. It was magnificent in a severe, forbidding way, more fortress than residence, designed to withstand siege rather than welcome guests. "It has been in my family for 300 years, Friedrich said, speaking for the first time in ours. Built during the 30 Years' War. Practical, defensible, enduring. Much like the von Reichenbach approach to life." As they passed through the massive iron gates, Fiona noticed the precision with which the grounds were maintained. Every hedge was trimmed to geometric perfection. Every pathway was swept clean. Every window gleamed despite the autumn chill. The castle might be medieval in architecture, but it was maintained with industrial efficiency. Servants lined the entrance hall, standing at rigid attention as Friedrich led Fiona inside. He introduced her to the senior staff with military brevity. Frau Müller, the housekeeper, a stern woman of 60 with eyes that missed nothing. Herr Braun, the butler, whose posture suggested a former military career. And a dozen others, whose names and faces blurred together in Fiona's exhausted mind. "Frau Müller will show you to your chambers," Friedrich said. "We shall dine at 8 o'clock precisely. I expect punctuality." He turned and strode away. his footsteps echoing on stone floors, leaving Fiona standing in the entrance hall of what would now be her home. Frau Müller led her through a maze of corridors, up a curved stone staircase, and finally to a suite of rooms in the East Tower. The chambers were spacious, beautifully furnished in heavy German Baroque style and utterly devoid of warmth. Thick tapestries hung on stone walls. A massive four-poster bed dominated the bedroom. Windows looked out over mountain peaks already dusted with early snow. "The Baron's chambers are in the West Tower," Frau Müller said in heavily accented English. "You will have privacy until the wedding night. After that, the Baron expects you to fulfill your wifely duties with appropriate discretion." The clinical description of marital intimacy made Fiona's stomach turn, but she simply nodded. This was her life now. She had chosen it. She would endure it. "Thank you, Frau Müller. That will be all." The housekeeper departed with a curt nod, and Fiona was finally alone. She moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. The mountains surrounded the castle like prison walls. The forests were dark and impenetrable. The sky was grey and heavy with coming snow. Everything about this place felt foreign, harsh, unforgiving. She thought of Brennan Hall's green grounds, the soft Irish rain, the familiarity of every room and corridor. She thought of James's smile, his warmth, the way he had looked at her as if she were something precious and miraculous. A sob escaped her throat before she could suppress it. Then another, and another, until she was weeping with her face pressed against the window glass, her body shaking with grief for everything she had lost. When the tears finally subsided, Fiona straightened, wiped her face, and began unpacking her few belongings. Crying changed nothing. Grief was a luxury she could no longer afford. That evening, she dressed for dinner in her best remaining gown, a deep green silk that had been altered twice to keep up with changing fashions. In the castle's formal dining room, Friedrich awaited her at a table set for two with crystal and silver that gleamed in candlelight. Their conversation during the meal was stilted, formal, painful in its emptiness. Friedrich discussed his business interests, his expectations for household management, and the social obligations she would be required to fulfill. Fiona listened, responded appropriately, and felt herself becoming a ghost even while still alive. After dinner, Friedrich escorted her back to her chambers with perfect propriety. "The wedding will take place in 2 weeks," he said at her door. "My family chapel. Simple ceremony, minimal guests. I dislike ostentation. As you wish." He studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You are very pale, Lady Fiona. Frau Müller will ensure you have everything you need. If you require anything, you need only ask. Thank you, Baron." He bowed stiffly and departed. Fiona entered her chambers and closed the door, leaning against it as if she could somehow keep the entire world at bay through that simple wooden barrier. A letter waited on her dressing table. Irish postage. Her heart leaped with irrational hope. She tore it open with trembling hands. The handwriting was Mrs. Donnelly's, not James's. "My dearest Lady Fiona, I hope this letter finds you well in your new home. Brennan Hall prospers thanks to your sacrifice. The debts have been settled, and we have begun necessary repairs. Your decision has saved us all. I write also with news I felt you should know, though it pains me to share it. Captain MacLeod returned to Brennan Hall 3 days after your departure. He was much changed, my lady. The light had gone from his eyes. He asked for you, and when I told him you had already left for Germany, he did not speak for several minutes. He asked me to give you a message, should I ever write to you. He said to tell you that he understands your choice, that he bears you no ill will, and that he prays for your happiness even if it cannot be with him. Then he left for Scotland. His regiment departs for Afghanistan in the spring. I fear, my lady, that he seeks danger as a man might seek oblivion. Please know that we think of you daily and pray for your well-being." With devoted affection, Mrs. Donnelly Fiona read the letter 3 times, each word a knife wound to her heart. James had returned, had looked for her, had sent her blessing through a servant because they could no longer speak directly, and now he was going to Afghanistan, one of the most dangerous postings in the British Empire, where officers died with alarming regularity in skirmishes with tribal fighters, and disease claimed more lives than battle. He seeks danger as a man might seek oblivion. She had not merely broken his heart, she had set him on a path toward destruction. Fiona pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes, imagining she could somehow send her thoughts across the miles to Scotland, to James, to warn him not to throw his life away because of her choice. But thoughts travelled nowhere, wishes changed nothing, and she was bound by contract and honour to become Baroness von Reichenbach in 14 days. The wedding took place on a grey November morning in the castle's small chapel. Fiona wore a dress of white silk that Friedrich had commissioned, elegant and expensive and utterly joyless. No family attended, no friends celebrated. Only Friedrich's solicitor and a handful of servants witnessed their vows. The ceremony was conducted in German and Latin. Fiona understood little of what was said, but she repeated the words she was instructed to repeat, made the promises she was required to make, and felt the gold band slide onto her finger like a shackle. When the priest declared them married, Friedrich kissed her cheek with the same emotion he might show a business contract. They signed the registry in silence, and Lady Fiona Brennan ceased to exist, replaced by Baroness Fiona von Reichenbach, a woman she did not recognize. The wedding breakfast was a formal affair with local aristocracy in attendance, all speaking rapid German that Fiona could barely follow. She smiled, nodded, and played her part with the same discipline she had learned in Ireland's crumbling drawing rooms. That night, Friedrich came to her chambers. He was not cruel. He was not violent. He was simply businesslike, treating the consummation of their marriage as another obligation to be fulfilled with efficiency and minimal sentiment. Fiona lay still and silent, her mind far away, her body present only because it had to be. When it was over, Friedrich rose, dressed, and returned to his own chambers without a word. Fiona curled on her side, pulled the blankets around her, and stared at the dying fire in the hearth. This was her life now. This cold efficiency, this absence of passion, this careful dance of duty without desire. She thought of James, wondered if he was thinking of her, wondered if he was warm or cold, safe or in danger, alive or already lost to the Afghan frontier. And she wept silently into her pillow, mourning not just for what she had lost, but for what she had destroyed in losing it. Winter descended on Schloss Reichenbach with brutal efficiency. Snow buried the grounds. Wind howled through the towers. The castle became an island of stone and ice, cut off from the world below. Fiona learned to manage the household with Frau Müller's stern guidance. She learned to navigate the rigid protocols of German aristocratic life. She learned to smile at social functions while feeling nothing inside. She learned to speak German with increasing fluency, though the language felt harsh and cold compared to the musical lilt of Irish English. And each night, Friedrich visited her chambers with the same mechanical regularity, fulfilling his marital obligations without joy or tenderness, leaving her each time feeling more hollow than before. Letters arrived from Ireland with news of Brennan Hall's restoration. The roof had been repaired. The grounds were being tended. The family name was slowly being rehabilitated. Her sacrifice was bearing fruit. But no letters came from James. No word from Scotland. No news of the regiment bound for Afghanistan. Fiona told herself this was for the best. A clean break. No lingering threads to torment her. Yet she found herself watching for Irish or Scottish postage on every delivery, hoping against hope for some sign that he was alive, that he had survived her betrayal, that he had found some measure of peace. 3 months into her marriage, Fiona stood at her tower window watching snow fall over the Bavarian mountains, and realized with crushing clarity that she had saved Brennan Hall but destroyed herself in the process. She was a baroness, wealthy, secure, socially elevated. She was also utterly, profoundly, irreversibly alone. And somewhere across Europe, James MacLeod was marching toward Afghanistan, carrying her rejection like an open wound, seeking death in a foreign land because the woman he loved had chosen duty over desire. The price of survival, Fiona understood now, was paid not once but every day, in small deaths of the spirit, in the slow erosion of everything that made life worth living. She had saved her family's estate. She had destroyed her own soul. And there was no going back, no undoing what had been done, no redemption available for choices made in desperation and sealed in German gold. Spring came late to the Bavarian Alps. Fiona watched from her tower window as the snow gradually retreated from the lower valleys, revealing the dark green of pine forests and the grey stone of mountain outcroppings. The world beyond Schloss Reichenbach was awakening from winter's grip, but inside the castle walls the cold seemed permanent, embedded in the very stones. She had been Baroness von Reichenbach for 5 months. 5 months of rigid routine, of silent dinners with a husband who spoke only of business matters, of managing a household with Prussian efficiency, of learning to navigate a society that viewed her as a curiosity at best and an interloper at worst. The German aristocracy had welcomed her with polite formality and hidden suspicion. At social gatherings, she caught whispered conversations that ceased when she approached. She understood enough German now to know they questioned why Baron von Reichenbach had imported an Irish bride when perfectly suitable German women were available. Some speculated about hidden scandals, others suggested financial motivations. None imagined the simple, brutal truth that their marriage was a transaction. Nothing more. Friedrich remained exactly as he had been during their courtship. Courteous, distant, punctual in all things, including his nightly visits to her chambers. He never raised his voice, never showed anger or affection, never deviated from the mechanical routine of their married life. Fiona had learned to exist in the spaces between obligations. She read voraciously in Friedrich's extensive library, teaching herself German philosophy and history. She walked the castle grounds when weather permitted, always accompanied by a maid as propriety demanded. She wrote letters to Mrs. Donnelly, carefully crafted missives that described her new life in pleasant, empty terms that revealed nothing of her growing despair. And she waited, with increasing anxiety, for news from Afghanistan. The newspapers Friedrich received from Berlin and Munich occasionally contained reports from the frontier. British forces engaged in skirmishes with Afghan tribal fighters, officers killed in ambushes, disease ravaging encampments. Each report made Fiona's heart clench with fear that James's name might appear among the casualties. On an April morning, 6 months into her marriage, everything changed. Fiona was supervising the spring cleaning of the main hall when Frau Müller appeared, her usually stern expression troubled. "Baroness, there is a visitor, a woman claiming to be the late Baron's sister." Fiona's hands stilled on the inventory list she had been reviewing. Friedrich had never mentioned family beyond his deceased parents. In 6 months of marriage, not a single relative had visited or even written. "The late Baron's sister?" Fiona repeated carefully. "You mean Friedrich's sister?" "9. Baroness, the first Baron von Reichenbach, the master's father." Frau Müller's discomfort was evident. "Fräulein Margarete von Reichenbach. She has not been to Schloss Reichenbach in 15 years. The master forbade her presence after certain disagreements. This was the most personal information Frau Müller had ever shared. Fiona set down her papers, curiosity overwhelming caution. "Show her to the drawing room. Offer refreshments." "I shall join her shortly." Frau Müller hesitated. "Baroness, perhaps we should await the master's return. He would not approve. The master is in Munich for 3 days on business. I am mistress of this household in his absence. Show our guest to the drawing room." The housekeeper's expression suggested this was a mistake, but she obeyed with a curt nod. Fiona changed from her working dress into something more appropriate for receiving guests, her mind racing with questions. What family scandal could have resulted in 15 years of exile? What disagreement could have been so severe that Friedrich had never even mentioned having an aunt? When she entered the drawing room, she found a woman of perhaps 60 standing at the window, her back to the door. She wore traveling clothes of excellent quality but outdated style, as if she had not updated her wardrobe in a decade. When she turned, Fiona saw a face that bore a striking resemblance to Friedrich, the same severe bone structure and steel-grey eyes, but softened by an expression of intelligent curiosity rather than rigid control. "You must be the Irish bride," the woman said in English touched with a German accent. "Margaret von Reichenbach, Friedrich's aunt, though he would prefer to deny my existence entirely." Fiona curtsied. "Baroness Fiona von Reichenbach." "You are welcome in this house, Fräulein." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "Am I? How refreshing. Friedrich has trained you well to observe courtesies, even when they contradict his wishes." There was no malice in the observation, only dry amusement. Fiona found herself liking this woman immediately, if only because she represented the first hint of warmth Fiona had encountered since arriving in Bavaria. "Please sit. Frau Müller is bringing tea." They settled into chairs near the fireplace. Margaret studied Fiona with frank appraisal. "You are very young," she said, "and very sad, I see it in your eyes. The look of someone performing a role rather than living a life." The directness was startling. Fiona's carefully maintained composure wavered. "I am adjusting to my new circumstances," she said carefully. "That is what women always say when they have made terrible sacrifices for practical reasons." Margaret accepted a teacup from Frau Müller, who retreated with obvious reluctance. "I did the same once, sacrificed love for duty. It destroyed me in ways I am still discovering 30 years later." Fiona set down her own teacup, her hands trembling slightly. "Why are you here, Fräulein von Reichenbach?" "Because I heard my nephew had married, and I wanted to see what manner of woman would accept such a cold arrangement." Margaret sipped her tea. "Friedrich is my brother's son. I loved my brother dearly, but he raised Friedrich with all the warmth of a military academy. Duty, discipline, emotional restraint, those were the pillars of his education. You speak as if you disapprove." "I disapprove of what it cost him." Margaret set down her cup. "Has Friedrich told you about Anna, his first wife? Only that she died in childbirth." "Died, yes, but not in the way he suggests." Margaretta's expression turned grave. "Anna was my goddaughter, a sweet, romantic girl who loved Friedrich desperately and wanted nothing more than to make him happy. He married her because it was expected, because she came from a good family, because it was the practical thing to do. But he could not give her what she truly needed, what all humans need: affection, tenderness, the feeling of being cherished rather than merely tolerated." Fiona felt her throat tighten. This was too close, too painful, too much like looking into a mirror that showed possible futures. "Anna became pregnant," Margareta continued. "The physicians warned it was dangerous. Friedrich told her to terminate the pregnancy for her own safety. But Anna was desperate to give him an heir, desperate to prove her worth to a man who treated her like a pleasant but unnecessary addition to his household. She refused. She carried the child to term, and both died during a difficult labor." "That is tragic," Fiona whispered. "But surely you cannot blame Friedrich for her choice." "I do not blame him for her death. I blame him for the life she lived before dying." Margareta's eyes were fierce. Friedrich convinced himself that Anna's death vindicated his approach to marriage, that love was dangerous, that emotion led to destruction, that only cold practicality could be trusted. He armored himself so completely that he became incapable of human warmth. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "And now he has imported another young woman to fill the same role, another sacrifice to his need for order and control. Tell me, Baroness, what did you give up to become his wife?" The question pierced Fiona's defenses like a blade. She opened her mouth to offer some polite deflection, but what emerged instead was truth. "Everything," she whispered. "I gave up everything." Margaret nodded slowly, sadly, as if this was exactly what she had expected to hear. "There was a man," Fiona continued, the words spilling out despite her attempts at control. "James. We loved each other since we were young, but my family was ruined financially, and he had no fortune. I chose duty over love. I chose survival over happiness. I chose to save my family's estate by marrying a stranger who offered gold instead of affection. And the man you loved? He is in Afghanistan, serving with the British Army. Possibly dead by now for all I know, because letters do not reach me here, and Friedrich does not consider my emotional well-being worthy of discussion." The confession left Fiona feeling hollow and exposed. She had spoken these truths to no one, had carried them alone through 6 months of German winter, and now they lay between her and this woman she had known for less than an hour. Margaret reached across the space between their chairs and took Fiona's hand. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to the rigid formality Fiona had experienced since arriving in Bavaria, that she nearly wept from the simple human contact. "My dear child," Margaret said softly, "you have made the same mistake I made. You have confused survival with living. They are not the same thing. What choice did I have?" Fiona's voice cracked. "Let my family fall into complete ruin. Watch servants who had served us for decades turned out without support. See my father's legacy destroyed because I was selfish enough to choose love over responsibility. Those were the choices you believed you had, but there are always more options than the ones we see when we are desperate and afraid. Margaret squeezed her hand gently. I gave up the man I loved to marry, a count my family had selected. I was dutiful, proper, exactly what was expected. My husband died 10 years later, and I inherited nothing because the estate passed to his nephew. I sacrificed love for security that proved temporary, while the man I refused lived a long, happy life with someone else. I see his children sometimes, his grandchildren. I see the life I might have lived, and I know that I chose wrong. But my situation was different, Fiona protested weakly. The debts were real. The consequences were immediate. And are you happy now? Is this life you have purchased with your heart's blood worth the price you paid? The question hung in the air between them. Fiona could not answer because the answer was too terrible to speak aloud. Margaret stood, still holding Fiona's hand, and pulled her gently to her feet. Come with me, she said. There is something you must see. She led Fiona through the castle corridors to a wing Fiona had never explored, the oldest section of Schloss Reichenbach, where medieval stonework gave way to even more ancient foundations. They climbed a narrow spiral staircase to a small tower room that overlooked the western mountains. The room was clearly unused, covered in dust, but it had once been beautifully appointed. A woman's sitting room, Fiona realized. Anna's room, most likely, before her death. Margaret moved to a wooden chest beneath the window and opened it. Inside lay stacks of letters, journals, and a small portrait. Anna's things, Margaret explained. Friedrich ordered them destroyed after her death, but the servants could not bring themselves to burn them. They brought them here instead. She lifted out a leather-bound journal and handed it to Fiona. Read, "Understand what awaits you if you continue down this path." Fiona opened the journal to a random page. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, increasingly erratic toward the end. March 15th, 1867. Friedrich came to my chambers again tonight. I tried to speak with him afterward, to simply talk as husband and wife should talk, but he dressed immediately and returned to his own rooms without a word. I am beginning to understand that he does not see me as a person, but as a function. I manage his household. I attend social obligations. I provide potential heirs, but I am not loved. I am not even truly seen. Sometimes I wonder if I am becoming invisible even to myself. If I disappeared tomorrow, would Friedrich notice beyond the inconvenience of finding another wife to fulfill these duties? Fiona turned to another page, her hands shaking. June the 2nd, 1868. The physician confirmed what I suspected. I am with child. I should be joyful, but I feel only terror, not of the childbirth itself, but of bringing a child into this cold house, into a life where duty replaces love and efficiency substitutes for warmth. What kind of mother can I be when I am barely more than a ghost myself? Friedrich received the news with satisfaction. An heir, that is all he said. An heir, as if I had successfully completed a business transaction rather than created a new life. And finally, the last entry, dated 2 weeks before Anna's death, August 10th, 1868. The physicians say I should terminate this pregnancy, that my constitution cannot bear the strain. Friedrich agrees with them. He has made it clear that he values my continued function over a potential heir, but this child is the only thing that makes me feel human anymore, the only thing in this castle that needs me for more than what I can do, but for who I am. If I lose this baby, I lose the last piece of myself that remembers how to love. I will not terminate. I will carry this child to term, and perhaps if I survive, this baby will teach Friedrich how to feel again, how to love, how to be more than a machine of duty and discipline. If I do not survive, at least I will have chosen my own end, rather than existing in this beautiful prison until I fade away entirely. The journal entry ended there. 2 weeks later, Anna von Reichenbach died giving birth to a son who lived less than an hour. Fiona closed the journal carefully, her vision blurred with tears. She understood now. Anna had not died trying to give Friedrich an heir. She had died trying to feel something, anything, in a life that had become an elegant form of death. "Do you see?" Margareta asked softly. Do you understand what this place does to women who sacrifice everything for duty? Fiona nodded, unable to speak. You are already beginning the same transformation, Margaret continued. I see it in your posture, your careful words, the way you have learned to exist without truly living. In another year you will be like Anna. In 5 years you will be like me, a ghost haunting the ruins of choices made in desperation. What can I do? Fiona whispered. I am married. The contracts are signed. The debts are paid. There is no escape from what I have become. Margaret took both of Fiona's hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. Write to him, she said urgently. Write to the man you love. Find out if he still lives, if there is still hope. You may have married Friedrich, but you are not dead yet. Do not make my mistake of waiting until it is too late to reclaim any piece of happiness. Friedrich would never allow it. Friedrich does not have to know. I still have contacts in Berlin, in London. I can arrange for letters to be sent through channels he cannot monitor. But you must act quickly, before you lose the courage, before you become so thoroughly molded to this life that you forget there was ever any other possibility. Fiona stared at this woman who was offering her a lifeline she had not known she needed, a chance at contact with the world beyond these stone walls, a possibility of knowing whether James had survived her betrayal. Why are you helping me? She asked. Margaret's smile was sad, tinged with regret. Because I cannot save myself, but perhaps I can save you from making all the mistakes I made. Perhaps one of us can escape the prison we built from duty and fear. That evening, after Margaret had departed with promises to return within the month, Fiona sat at her writing desk in the tower room and drafted a letter she never thought she would write. Dearest James, I do not know if this letter will reach you, or if you are even alive to receive it. I do not know if you can ever forgive me for the choice I made, or if you would even want to hear from the woman who destroyed what we had. But I must try. I must know if you survived Afghanistan, if you are safe, if you have found any measure of peace or happiness in the life I forced you to live without me. I am married now, as you know. I am Baroness von Reichenbach, mistress of a German castle, wife to a man who treats me with perfect courtesy and absolute indifference. I saved my family's estate, I fulfilled my duty, and I am more alone than I have ever been. This is not a plea for rescue or a request for anything you cannot give. It is simply a need to know that you exist somewhere in this world, that the love we shared was not completely destroyed by my terrible choice. Please write back if you can, even if only to tell me you hate me, even if only to curse my name. I need to know you are alive. With all the love I had no right to keep, Fiona. She sealed the letter, addressed it to James's regiment and gave it to Margaret when she returned 2 weeks later. And then she waited, hoping against hope that somewhere across Europe and Asia, a Scottish officer would receive words from a woman who had broken his heart and would find it in himself to respond. The answer came 6 weeks later, delivered through Margaret's secret channels, written in handwriting Fiona recognized immediately. She opened it with trembling hands, terrified of what she might find inside. Fiona, I am alive. Barely. Your letter found me in a hospital in Peshawar, recovering from wounds received in an ambush 3 months ago. I was shot twice, nearly died from infection, and spent 6 weeks delirious with fever. During that fever, I called your name. The nurses told me I spoke of Ireland, of oak trees and broken promises, of a woman I loved who chose gold over my heart. I do not hate you. I wish I could. Hatred would be easier than this hollow ache that fills the space where my heart used to be. You want to know if I have found peace or happiness? No. I have found neither. I have found only the numbing routine of military service and the occasional excitement of combat that makes me feel alive for brief moments before the emptiness returns. I am being reassigned to more dangerous duty. Frontier patrols where officers die with regularity. I volunteered for it, not because I seek death precisely, but because I no longer fear it. What is there to fear when the worst has already happened? You say you are alone in your German castle. I am alone on the Afghan frontier. We are both prisoners of the choices we made, Fiona. The difference is that I would have chosen poverty and hardship if it meant waking beside you each morning. You chose otherwise. I do not blame you. I understand duty. I understand responsibility. But understanding does not heal wounds or fill the emptiness. Do not write again. Knowing you are alive and lost to me is torture enough. Continued correspondence would be cruelty to us both. James Fiona read the letter 3 times, then pressed it to her chest and wept silently in her tower room, while the Bavarian sunset painted the mountains in shades of blood and gold. He was alive, wounded, broken, seeking death on the frontier because she had destroyed his reasons for living, and there was nothing she could do to save him, just as there was nothing he could do to save her. They were both ghosts now, haunting the ruins of the life they might have shared, bound by duty to existences that felt more like death than living. The price of her choice was becoming clearer with each passing day. She had not merely sacrificed her happiness. She had destroyed 2 lives, possibly 3, if she counted Friedrich's continued emotional isolation. And the worst part was knowing that she would make the same choice again, if faced with the same circumstances. Because duty demanded it. Because honor required it. Because she had been taught since childhood that personal happiness was less important than family legacy and social responsibility. She had been taught well, and she would die from those teachings slowly, over decades in a beautiful German prison, while the man she loved sought death in Afghan valleys because living without her was unbearable. This was the price of survival. This was the cost of doing what was expected, proper, responsible. And Fiona understood now, with crushing clarity, that she would pay this price every day for the rest of her life, each payment a little death, until nothing remained but the shell of a woman going through motions in a castle that felt more like a tomb. Summer arrived in Bavaria with unexpected intensity. The mountains shed their last snow, wildflowers bloomed in alpine meadows, and the dark forests softened with new growth. But inside Schloss Reichenbach, the seasons made little difference. The stone walls remained cool, the routines unchanged, the emotional temperature permanently frozen. Fiona had been married for 10 months. 10 months of performing the role of Baroness, with increasing competence and decreasing spirit. She spoke fluent German now, managed the household with efficiency that even Frau Müller grudgingly praised, and navigated aristocratic social obligations with practiced grace. She was exactly what Friedrich required, that perfect wife in every way, except the one that mattered most, the capacity to feel anything beyond numb acceptance of her circumstances. James's letter remained hidden in a locked drawer in her writing desk. She had not written back, respecting his request for silence even though it cost her dearly. But she read his words repeatedly, torturing herself with the knowledge that he was alive, wounded, seeking death in the very places where death came easily to those who stopped caring about survival. Margaret visited monthly now, always when Friedrich was away on business. Their conversations became Fiona's only connection to anything resembling authentic human feeling. The older woman brought news from the wider world, books that Friedrich would not approve, and most importantly, a willingness to speak honestly about the reality of their shared predicament. "You are fading," Margaret observed during a July visit. They sat in the garden where roses bloomed in regimented rows, beautiful and controlled like everything else at Schloss Reichenbach. "I see less of you each time I come. Soon there will be nothing left but the performance." Fiona did not deny it. What would be the point? "I received another letter from Ireland," she said instead, drawing the envelope from her pocket. "Mrs. Donnelly writes that Brennan Hall is fully restored. They have hired new staff. The grounds are magnificent again. My sacrifice was not in vain. Was it not?" Margaret's tone was sharp. "Tell me, Fiona, if you could travel back in time to that moment when you held Friedrich's proposal in one hand and James's love in the other, would you choose differently?" The question haunted Fiona, because she did not know the answer anymore. A year ago she would have said no, she would make the same choice. Duty demanded it, honor required it. Her family's survival depended on it. But now, after months of this beautiful empty existence, after reading James's letter describing his self-destructive despair, after watching herself become a ghost in expensive silk, she was no longer certain. "I do not know," she whispered, "and that uncertainty terrifies me more than any definite answer could." Before Margaret could respond, Frau Müller appeared at the garden entrance, her expression troubled. "Baroness, the master has returned from Munich unexpectedly. He requests your presence in his study immediately." Fiona's stomach tightened. Friedrich never deviated from his schedule. His return 3 days early signaled something significant, possibly problematic. She found him standing at his desk, still in traveling clothes, his expression more animated than she had seen in months. Not quite emotional, but something approaching it. Concern, perhaps, or anger carefully controlled. Fiona. He rarely used her given name. The formality was slipping, which meant the situation was serious. "Sit down, we must discuss something of importance." She settled into the chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap, every inch the composed Baroness. Friedrich paced to the window, his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension. "I have received information," he began, his voice carefully measured, "regarding your correspondence with a British military officer stationed in Afghanistan, Captain James MacLeod of the Scottish Regiment." Fiona's blood turned to ice. How did he know? Margaret had promised the letters were secure, sent through channels he could not monitor. "I see from your expression that the information is accurate." Friedrich turned to face her, his steel-grey eyes unreadable. "Did you truly believe I would not discover such activity? I built a fortune by knowing everything that occurs within my sphere of influence. Did you think your private affairs would escape my notice?" "Friedrich, I can explain. I do not require explanations. I require honesty." He moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and withdrew a single sheet of paper. James's letter, the one she had hidden so carefully. "My valet discovered this while conducting routine maintenance of your chambers. He brought it to me immediately, as is his duty, betrayed by a servant, by the very systems of control and surveillance that made Schloss Reichenbach function with such precision." Fiona should have known. In a household where efficiency was paramount, privacy was an illusion. "You violated my privacy," she said, finding her voice through the shock and fear. "I exercised my rights as your husband." Friedrich's tone remained calm, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. "Tell me about this Captain MacLeod. Tell me why you are corresponding with a lover while married to me. He is not my lover, he was." Fiona lifted her chin, refusing to cower. "Before I married you, before I had any choice but to accept your proposal and abandon the only man I ever loved." "Ah." Friedrich set the letter down carefully. "So this is the sacrifice you spoke of during our journey to Bavaria, the regret you acknowledged so readily. A Scottish officer without fortune or prospects, yes. And you chose my money over his affection. I chose my family's survival over my own happiness, exactly as you chose your first wife's death over her maternal desires. The comparison was cruel, designed to wound." Fiona regretted it the moment the words left her mouth, but she could not unsay them. Friedrich's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or recognition of an uncomfortable truth. "My wife's death was the result of her romantic delusions," he said quietly. "She believed love could overcome medical reality. She was wrong, and it killed her. Or perhaps she chose death over the slow suffocation of life with a man who could not love her." Fiona stood, her composure cracking. Perhaps she understood that some prisons are more beautiful than others, but still prisons nonetheless. "And is that how you view our marriage? As a prison? What else would you call it?" The words poured out now, a year of suppressed grief and rage finding voice. "You purchased me, Friedrich. You paid £12,000 for a wife who would manage your household and warm your bed and never trouble you with inconvenient emotions. You got exactly what you paid for. A perfect baroness who performs her duties with appropriate efficiency and slowly dies inside while doing so." Friedrich stared at her for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "Sit down, Fiona. Please." The please surprised her enough that she obeyed. Friedrich moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture military straight. "I knew about Captain MacLeod before I proposed marriage to you," he said quietly. "Your father spoke of him during our meeting in Munich, told me you were in love with a penniless Scottish officer, that he had forbidden the match, that you were heartbroken but dutiful." Fiona's breath caught. "You knew? I knew. I chose to proceed anyway because I believed, as I still believe, that love is a dangerous foundation for marriage. Practical compatibility, mutual respect, shared goals, these are what sustain a union over decades. Passion fades, duty endures. Duty is not enough to sustain a life, is it not? I have sustained my life quite successfully through duty and discipline. You have sustained an existence, Fiona corrected. That is not the same as living. Anna understood that. Your Aunt Margaret understands it. And I am learning it every day in this beautiful fortress you have built around your heart. Friedrich turned to face her, and for the first time since their marriage she saw genuine emotion cross his features. Confusion, uncertainty, perhaps even pain. What would you have me do, Fiona? I am 43 years old. I was raised to value control, efficiency, emotional restraint. These are not merely habits. They are the foundation of who I am. I cannot simply discard them because my second wife finds them insufficient. I am not asking you to discard them. I'm asking you to acknowledge that they are killing us both. Us? Friedrich's eyebrows rose slightly. You presume to know what kills me? I know what killed Anna. I have read her journals. Margaret showed me. Anna did not die in childbirth, Friedrich. She died from years of emotional starvation in a marriage that provided everything except what she actually needed. Human warmth, affection, the feeling of being cherished rather than tolerated. The mention of Anna's journals made Friedrich's jaw tighten. My aunt had no right to share those private writings. She had every right. She is trying to prevent history from repeating itself, trying to save me from becoming another ghost in this castle. You speak as if I am some manner of villain. I have given you security, social position, freedom from poverty. What more can you reasonably expect? I expect nothing. Fiona's voice broke. That is the problem, Friedrich. I have learned to expect nothing because you have taught me that expecting anything beyond cold courtesy is futile. But James expected everything from me. He offered me poverty and hardship and struggle, yes, but he also offered me love. Real, messy, passionate love that made me feel alive instead of merely functional. And where is this passionate lover now? Friedrich's tone turned harsh. Seeking death in Afghanistan because he cannot accept that practical realities sometimes require difficult choices. That is the problem with love, Fiona. It makes people irrational, self-destructive, incapable of accepting what cannot be changed. At least he feels something. Fiona stood again, unable to remain still. At least he cared enough to be destroyed when I chose duty over desire. You would never be destroyed by losing someone because you never allow yourself to care enough for loss to matter. The accusation hung in the air between them. Friedrich's expression hardened, his walls reconstructing themselves with visible effort. This conversation is unproductive, he said, his voice returning to its usual measured tone. I did not summon you here to debate the nature of marriage or emotion. I summoned you to inform you that correspondence with Captain MacLeod will cease immediately. I will not tolerate my wife conducting romantic exchanges with another man, regardless of your history together. He asked me not to write again. I have honored that request. Good. See that you continue to do so. Furthermore, Margaret is no longer welcome at Schloss Reichenbach. Her influence has clearly been detrimental to your adjustment to married life. You cannot forbid me from seeing your own aunt. I can and I am. She was banned from this household 15 years ago for encouraging my mother's defiance of my father. I allowed her recent visits out of courtesy to you, but that courtesy has been revoked. If she appears here again, she will be turned away. Fiona stared at this man she had married, this stranger who controlled every aspect of her existence, with the same efficiency he applied to his business investments. She understood now why Anna had chosen death over this life. At least, death was final. This was eternal imprisonment in a beautiful cage. Is there anything else? She asked, her voice hollow. Friedrich studied her for a moment, and she thought she saw something like regret flicker across his features, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. No, you are dismissed. Fiona left his study with measured steps, maintaining her composure until she reached her tower chambers. Only then did she allow herself to collapse into the window seat, pressing her forehead against the cold glass, silent tears streaming down her face. She had lost James by choice. Now she had lost Margaret by command. The last threads connecting her to anything resembling human warmth had been severed. She was utterly alone in this fortress of stone and duty. That night, Friedrich did not come to her chambers, nor the next night, nor the night after that. A week passed without any private contact beyond formal greetings at dinner. He was punishing her, Fiona realized, not through cruelty, but through withdrawal of even the minimal connection their marriage had provided. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt herself disappearing further into the emptiness that had become her constant companion. 3 weeks after their confrontation, a letter arrived from Afghanistan, not through Margaret's secret channels, but through official military correspondence forwarded by Friedrich's solicitor. Fiona opened it with trembling hands, knowing before she read a word that it contained devastating news. Baroness von Reichenbach, it is my unfortunate duty to inform you that Captain James MacLeod was severely wounded during a frontier engagement on August 3, 1872. He was leading a patrol that came under ambush by tribal fighters. Captain MacLeod distinguished himself by protecting his men, ensuring their safe retreat while sustaining multiple injuries himself. He has been transported to the military hospital in Peshawar, where he is receiving the best possible care. However, I must inform you honestly that his prognosis is uncertain. The wounds were grave and infection has set in despite our physician's best efforts. Captain MacLeod has been delirious with fever for several days. In his delirium, he speaks frequently of Ireland, of a woman named Fiona, and of choices he regrets. I write to you because your name was found among his personal effects as his emergency contact. I do not know the nature of your relationship, but I felt you deserved to know his circumstances. Major Thomas Fitzgerald, British Army, Afghanistan frontier. The letter fell from Fiona's nerveless fingers. Severely wounded, uncertain prognosis, delirious with fever. Speaking her name. James was dying in a military hospital thousands of miles away, speaking her name in fever dreams, suffering because she had broken his heart so thoroughly that he no longer cared whether he lived or died. Fiona walked to Friedrich's study without knocking, the letter clutched in her hand. He looked up from his papers, his expression carefully neutral. Fiona, this is irregular. I need to go to Afghanistan. The words came out flat, emotionless, because if she allowed herself to feel anything, she would shatter completely. James has been gravely wounded. He may be dying. I need to see him one final time. Friedrich set down his pen with deliberate care. Absolutely not. Friedrich, please. No, you are my wife. You will not travel halfway across the world to attend a dying lover. It is inappropriate, scandalous, and I forbid it absolutely. He is dying because of me. Fiona's voice rose despite her attempts at control. He sought dangerous assignments because I destroyed his reasons for living. The least I can do is be present at his bedside, to offer whatever comfort I can, to tell him I am sorry for the choice I made. Your presence would offer no comfort. It would only remind him of what he lost, torture him in his final hours with the sight of a woman he cannot have. If you truly cared for his well-being, you would leave him to die in peace rather than inflicting yourself upon his suffering. The cruelty of the logic was undeniable. Friedrich was right. Her presence would be torture, not comfort. But how could she live with herself if James died alone, calling her name, while she remained in this German castle because propriety demanded it? I am begging you, Fiona whispered. Please, let me go to him. Friedrich stood, moved around his desk, and for a moment Fiona thought he might show her some measure of compassion. Instead, he simply looked at her with those cold, steel-grey eyes and shook his head. Your duty is here, to this household, to our marriage, to the obligations you accepted when you took my name and my fortune. I will not release you from those obligations, so you can indulge in sentimental weakness. He is dying. People die every day. You cannot save him. You can only dishonor yourself and disgrace our family name by making a spectacle of yourself halfway across the world. Fiona stared at this man who held complete legal and social control over her existence. This man who could prevent her from offering comfort to someone she loved, who could cage her in beautiful rooms and rigid expectations, who measured everything by duty and propriety and never by simple human decency. I hate you, she said quietly. I hate you with every fiber of my being, not for what you are, but for what you have made me become. Friedrich's expression did not change. Hatred is an emotion. I consider this progress from the numbness you have displayed these past months. Perhaps there is hope for you yet. The statement was so absurd, so divorced from reality, that Fiona could only turn and walk away before she did something irreversible. She returned to her tower chambers and locked the door. Then she sat at her writing desk and composed a letter she knew would never be sent, but needed to write nonetheless. My dearest James, I have received news of your injuries. I am told you may not survive, that you speak my name in fever, that you are suffering in ways I cannot ease because I am trapped in a prison of my own making. I chose wrong, James. I see that now with terrible clarity. I chose survival over living, duty over love, security over happiness. And in making that choice, I destroyed us both. If I could travel back to that October morning when I accepted Friedrich's proposal, I would burn the letter, refuse the money, and choose poverty with you over wealth without you. But I cannot travel back. I can only sit in this tower and know that you are dying, because I was too afraid, too dutiful, too convinced that practical considerations mattered more than the human heart. Forgive me if you can. Hate me if you must. But know that every day in this beautiful prison is punishment for the choice I made. And if you die, know that part of me dies with you. The part that remembered how to love, how to feel, how to be alive instead of merely existing. I am so sorry, my love. For everything. For all of it. Fiona. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the locked drawer with James's earlier correspondence. 2 letters that would never be sent. 2 confessions of love that came too late to matter. Outside her window, the Bavarian summer sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful, cold, indifferent to the human tragedy unfolding within the castle walls. Fiona pressed her forehead against the window glass and wept silently for the man dying in Afghanistan, for the woman disappearing in Bavaria, and for the love that had been sacrificed to gods who demanded everything and gave nothing in return. Autumn came to Schloss Reichenbach with brutal swiftness. The mountains blazed with color for 2 brief weeks before the first frost stripped the trees bare. Cold winds descended from the peaks, rattling windows and moaning through the castle's ancient corridors. The world was preparing for winter's siege, and Fiona felt herself preparing for something similar, a retreat into complete emotional hibernation from which she might never emerge. 6 weeks had passed since she had received news of James's injuries. 6 weeks of silence from Afghanistan. 6 weeks of not knowing whether he lived or died, whether he called her name still, or had finally found peace in death's embrace. Friedrich had forbidden her from making inquiries. When she attempted to contact the British military authorities through their solicitor, Friedrich intercepted the correspondence and destroyed it. He maintained absolute control over her communication with the outside world, ensuring that she remained isolated within the castle walls. They no longer spoke beyond what social necessity demanded. At dinner, they sat at opposite ends of the long table, eating in silence. 2 strangers bound by legal contract and mutual resentment. Friedrich had not visited her chambers since their confrontation. The physical aspect of their marriage had ceased entirely, as if he had decided that even that minimal connection was more than she deserved. Fiona moved through her days like a spectre. She managed the household with mechanical efficiency. She attended social obligations with perfect manners and empty eyes. She read books without comprehending them, walked gardens without seeing them, existed without living. Frau Müller watched her with increasing concern. The housekeeper had served the von Reichenbach family long enough to recognize the signs. She had seen Anna fade in exactly this way, watched a vibrant young woman become a ghost over the course of 2 years. Now, history was repeating itself with terrifying precision. On a grey October morning, Fiona was walking the castle ramparts when she noticed a carriage approaching through the autumn rain. Not Friedrich's carriage. He was in Berlin on business. Not any vehicle she recognized. The carriage bore no coat of arms, suggesting middle-class travelers rather than aristocracy. It stopped at the main gate, and Fiona watched from her elevated position as a man emerged, dressed in a British military officer's uniform. Her heart stopped, then began racing so violently she gripped the stone battlement for support. For one impossible, irrational moment, she thought it was James. That he had survived, had come to find her, had arrived to rescue her from this beautiful prison. But as the figure moved closer to the entrance, she saw the differences. This man was older, greying at the temples, moving with a limp that suggested old injuries. Not James. Someone else wearing the same uniform, the same insignia. Fiona gathered her skirts and ran through the corridors, down the stone staircase, her composure abandoned in desperate need to know why a British officer had arrived at Schloss Reichenbach unannounced. She reached the entrance hall just as Frau Müller was admitting the visitor. The man removed his rain-dampened coat, revealing the insignia of a major in the British Army. His face was weathered, kind, marked by years of service in difficult climates. "Baroness von Reichenbach?" he asked in English, touched with an Irish accent. "Major Thomas Fitzgerald. I wrote to you several weeks ago regarding Captain James MacLeod." Fiona's legs nearly gave out. She steadied herself against a marble pillar, her voice emerging as barely a whisper. "Is he dead?" "No, my lady. He lives. That is why I have come." Relief and terror washed through her in equal measure. James was alive, but Major Fitzgerald had travelled from Afghanistan to Bavaria to deliver news in person, which suggested complications beyond a simple letter's capacity to convey. "Please," Fiona managed, "come to the drawing room, Frau Müller. Bring tea and something warming for the Major. He has travelled far in foul weather." She led Fitzgerald to the drawing room, her mind racing with questions she dared not yet voice. Once they were settled and Frau Müller had departed, closing the door behind her, Fiona fixed the Major with desperate eyes. "Tell me everything, please. I have been forbidden from making inquiries, forbidden from corresponding. I have known nothing for 6 weeks beyond your initial letter." Fitzgerald's expression darkened. "Forbidden? By whom?" "My husband, Baron von Reichenbach. He believes my concern for Captain MacLeod is inappropriate, a violation of my marital duties." "I see." The Major's tone suggested he saw far more than Fiona had explicitly stated. "Then what I have to tell you may be unwelcome in this household. But I made a promise to Captain MacLeod, and I intend to honour it regardless of aristocratic sensibilities. James made you promise something?" "Yes, my lady. Before I explain, you must understand what Captain MacLeod endured. The ambush was brutal. He took 3 bullets protecting his men. By all rights, he should have died on that hillside. The fact that he survived the journey to Peshawar was miraculous. That he survived the subsequent infection was nothing short of extraordinary." Fitzgerald paused, his hands wrapped around the teacup Frau Müller had provided, his gaze distant, as if seeing events unfold again in memory. He was delirious for 3 weeks, fever so high the physicians gave him no chance of survival. During that delirium he spoke constantly, of Ireland, of oak trees and broken promises, of a woman named Fiona who had chosen duty over love. The nurses wrote down some of what he said. "I have those papers if you wish to read them." Fiona nodded, unable to speak. Fitzgerald withdrew a folded sheaf of papers from his coat and handed them across. Fiona opened them with trembling hands, seeing unfamiliar handwriting recording James's fever ravings. "Fiona, please. Don't choose him. Choose us. Choose love. The oak tree. We carved our names. Forever, we said. Forever was a lie. I cannot breathe without you. How do men breathe without their hearts? Let me die. Please. This half-life is worse than death. I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive you. Even though it kills me, I forgive you." The papers fell from Fiona's hands as sobs racked her body. She pressed both hands to her mouth, trying to contain the grief that threatened to tear her apart, but it was useless. She wept openly, desperately for the man who had nearly died calling her name, forgiving her even as her choice destroyed him. Fitzgerald waited patiently until her tears subsided. When she finally looked up, red-eyed and broken, he continued his account. The fever broke on the 21st day. Captain MacLeod woke weak, disoriented, but alive. When he was strong enough to speak coherently, I told him everything the nurses had recorded. He was mortified, my lady, ashamed that he had exposed his private grief so publicly. "What did he say?" Fiona whispered. "He said he wanted to die, that he had nothing left to live for, that he had failed in Afghanistan, as he had failed in everything else that mattered." Fitzgerald's voice roughened with emotion. "I have commanded men for 20 years, Baroness. I have seen soldiers lose limbs, lose friends, lose everything. But I have never seen a man as thoroughly broken as Captain MacLeod was in that hospital bed. This is my fault, all of it. That is not why I came, my lady. I did not travel 1,000 miles to assign blame. I came because Captain MacLeod, in a moment of clarity just before I departed for England, asked me to deliver a message to you. He made me promise, even though he knew it might be impossible to find you, even though he feared you would not want to hear from him. Fiona's heart clenched. What message? Fitzgerald met her eyes with steady compassion. He said to tell you that he understands why you made the choice you made, that he knows you acted from duty and love for your family, not from cruelty or indifference toward him. He said to tell you that he forgives you completely, and that you must forgive yourself, that you must find some way to live your life, to find some measure of happiness, or at least peace, because his suffering is unbearable if it serves no purpose beyond mutual destruction. He forgives me, Fiona repeated numbly. After everything I did to him, he forgives me. More than that, my lady. He begs you to forgive yourself. He said, and I quote, "Tell Fiona that I release her from any guilt or obligation she feels toward me. Tell her I want her to live, truly live, not merely exist in penance for a choice she had every right to make. Tell her that my love for her, however painful, is mine to bear, and I will not have her carrying it as punishment." The words were so perfectly James, so generous even in his own agony, that Fiona felt something crack open inside her chest. Not her heart breaking. That had happened long ago. This was something deeper, the shell she had built around her brokenness splitting apart to reveal the raw wound beneath. "How is he now?" she asked. "Physically, recovering slowly. The doctors say he will live, though he will carry those injuries for the rest of his days. He has been invalided out of active service. He is being sent back to Scotland to convalesce with his family. Scotland. James would be in Scotland, no longer in immediate danger, no longer seeking death on the frontier. The relief was overwhelming, but relief was complicated by a terrible new realization. James would live. He would return to Scotland, carry his wounds and his broken heart back to his family's estate, and somehow find a way to continue existing in a world where the woman he loved was forever beyond his reach. And she would remain here, in this German fortress, married to a man who measured everything by duty and gave nothing of himself, knowing that James lived and suffered because of her choice. "Thank you for coming, Major Fitzgerald," Fiona said quietly. "Thank you for honoring your promise to James. It means more than I can express. There is one more thing, my lady." Fitzgerald hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Captain MacLeod gave me something to deliver to you. He was quite insistent, even though I warned him it might cause difficulties. He withdrew a small package wrapped in oilcloth and tied with string. He said you would understand what it meant. He said you should keep it or destroy it as you saw fit, but that it belonged to you regardless of all that has passed between you." Fiona took the package with trembling hands. Even before she unwrapped it, she knew what it contained. Inside the oilcloth lay a small leather box, the same box James had opened in Brennan Hall's library more than a year ago, the box containing his mother's ring, the emerald set in simple gold. Fiona opened it with shaking fingers. The ring gleamed in the grey autumn light filtering through the drawing-room windows, a circle of gold, a promise made and broken, a future that would never be. Tucked beneath the ring was a note in James's handwriting, shaky from illness but unmistakably his. "Fiona, this ring was meant for you. It will never grace another woman's hand. I cannot wear it myself, and I cannot bear to keep it as a reminder of what I lost. So I give it to you, not as a reproach or a demand, but simply because it belongs to you as surely as my heart does. Do with it what you will. Throw it into a German river if you must. Sell it for charity, lock it away, and never look at it again. But know that it was chosen for you, bought with every penny I had saved, and offered with every hope I possessed. Those hopes are ashes now, but the ring remains a ghost of what might have been. Live well, my darling Fiona. That is all I ask." Fiona closed her hand around the ring, feeling its weight, its warmth, the solidity of gold against her palm. This small circle represented everything she had given up, every sacrifice she had made, every day of this beautiful, empty existence she endured. "Baroness," Fitzgerald's voice was gentle. "Are you unwell?" "I am perfectly well, Major." The lie came automatically, polished by months of practice. Please, you must be exhausted from your journey. I will have Frau Müller prepare a room for you. You will stay as our guest tonight, rest, and continue your journey refreshed. That is very kind, but I should not intrude. My husband is in Berlin. He will not return for 3 days. Please. It is the least I can do to thank you for bringing me this news. Fitzgerald accepted with obvious relief. The journey from Afghanistan through multiple countries had clearly taken its toll on a man no longer young. After arranging his accommodation, Fiona returned to her tower chambers, with the ring clutched in her hand. She locked the door, moved to her writing desk and opened the drawer where she kept James's previous letter, and her own unsent correspondence. She added the ring to this collection of ghosts and broken promises. Then she sat at the window, watching the October rain fall on the Bavarian mountains, and allowed herself to imagine for one brief, torturous moment what her life might have looked like if she had chosen differently. A cottage in Scotland. James beside her, his hand in hers. No fortune but infinite warmth. Struggle and hardship, yes, but also laughter, passion, the feeling of being cherished rather than tolerated, the knowledge that someone would die for her not from duty, but from love. She had traded that future for this one. Security for passion, wealth for warmth, survival for living. And now James was broken, she was disappearing, and the only thing either of them had gained was the bitter knowledge that duty was a harsh master and demanded payment in pieces of the soul. That evening, Fiona dined with Major Fitzgerald in the formal dining room. Their conversation was careful, avoiding the painful subjects that hung between them. He spoke of Ireland, of changes in Dublin and Cork, of mutual acquaintances from Fiona's life before Bavaria. The Irish accent, the familiar references, the simple human warmth of conversation with someone who understood where she came from, all of it was both comfort and torture, a reminder of everything she had left behind. As the evening drew to a close, Fitzgerald paused at the drawing-room door, clearly wrestling with whether to speak. "Baroness, forgive my presumption, but I must ask, are you happy here?" The question was inappropriate, intrusive, exactly the sort of thing no gentleman should ask a married woman. But his eyes were kind, his concern genuine, and Fiona found herself answering with an honesty that surprised them both. "No, Major Fitzgerald, I am not happy. I am not even alive in any meaningful sense. I am a function, a role, a set of duties performed with appropriate efficiency. I am exactly what my husband purchased when he paid my family's debts. Nothing more, nothing less." Fitzgerald's expression tightened with something like anger. "That is no life for anyone, especially not a woman of your spirit and intelligence. Spirit and intelligence are liabilities in a marriage built on duty rather than affection. They make one aware of everything one has lost, everything one endures, everything one will never have." Fiona managed a bitter smile. Ignorance would be kinder. Stupidity would be a blessing. Captain MacLeod was right to worry about you. James worries about me, constantly. Even delirious with fever, even broken by grief, his concern was for your well-being. He fears you have made yourself a martyr, that you suffer in silence because you believe it is your duty to endure whatever price your choice demands. He knows me well. Then, for his sake, if not your own, find some way to truly live. He cannot bear knowing that his suffering is matched by yours, that both of you are slowly dying in different prisons because of circumstances that were never entirely in your control." Fiona nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Fitzgerald departed the next morning with warm farewells and an open invitation to write to him should she ever need anything. Fiona stood at the castle entrance watching his carriage disappear down the mountain road, carrying with it the last direct connection to James, to Ireland, to the life she might have lived. 3 days later, Friedrich returned from Berlin. He said nothing about the British officer's visit, though the servants had certainly informed him. He said nothing about the ring Fiona now wore on a chain beneath her dress, hidden from sight, but pressed against her heart. He said nothing about the fact that she looked even more haunted than before, if such a thing were possible. They resumed their silent dinners, their separate chambers, their carefully maintained distance. Two people legally bound but emotionally severed, existing in the same space while inhabiting entirely different worlds. And in her tower room, late at night when sleep would not come, Fiona would take out James's ring and hold it in her palm, feeling its weight, imagining the future it represented, and weeping silently for everything that could have been and never would be. The price of her choice was becoming unbearable, and she was beginning to understand with terrible clarity that some prices could never be fully paid, only endured until they consumed everything worth living for. Winter returned to Schloss Reichenbach with merciless precision. Snow fell in November and did not stop. The castle became an island of grey stone rising from an ocean of white, completely isolated from the world below. Roads became impassable. Communication with the outside ceased. Fiona found herself trapped not merely by marriage contract and social convention, but by weather itself, as if nature conspired with Friedrich to ensure her complete imprisonment. She had been married for 14 months. 14 months that felt like 14 years, each day adding another layer to the numbness that had become her only defense against complete despair. Friedrich maintained his distance with the same rigid discipline he applied to everything. They spoke only when necessary. He had not visited her chambers since discovering her correspondence with James. Their marriage had become purely nominal, a legal arrangement stripped of even the minimal physical connection it once possessed. In mid-December, a single letter arrived through the last courier to reach the castle before the roads closed entirely. Irish postage, Mrs. Donnelly's handwriting. Fiona opened it with hands that had learned to tremble less over the months, though her heart still raced at any news from the world beyond these walls. Dearest Lady Fiona, I write with news both joyous and bittersweet. Brennan Hall flourishes beyond all expectation. Your sacrifice has borne magnificent fruit. The estate prospers, the grounds are restored to their former glory, and the Brennan name is once again spoken with respect throughout the county. But I write also with heavier tidings, and I pray this news reaches you swiftly, though I fear winter may delay its arrival. Captain James MacLeod returned to Scotland 3 months ago, invalided from military service due to injuries sustained in Afghanistan. I learned this from his brother, Laird Duncan MacLeod, who visited Brennan Hall last month on business matters. My lady, I hardly know how to write what I must tell you. Captain MacLeod's physical wounds are healing, but the Laird expressed grave concern for his brother's state of mind. He said James has become withdrawn, refusing visitors, spending days alone walking the Scottish Highlands regardless of weather. He speaks little, eats less, and shows no interest in anything beyond mere existence. The Laird asked after you specifically. He knows the history between you and his brother, knows what was sacrificed and why. He asked me to convey a message if I had means to reach you. He said, "Tell Lady Fiona that my brother is dying, not from his wounds, but from heartbreak. The physicians can do nothing for a man who has lost his will to live. If there is any mercy in her, any possibility of offering him some measure of peace before the end, I beg her to find it. Not for my sake, but for the love she once bore him. I do not know what this means, my lady, or what could be done from such distance. I share it only because I made a promise to the Laird, and because I believe you would want to know. Please write when you can. We think of you always. With devoted affection, Mrs. Donnelly." The letter slipped from Fiona's fingers and drifted to the floor like a fallen leaf. James was dying, not from bullets or infection, but from the slow erosion of everything that made life worth living. The same affliction that consumed her, killing him more slowly but just as surely as any wound. She moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the icy glass, staring at the snow-covered mountains that imprisoned her as effectively as iron bars. What mercy could she offer from a German castle while winter raged and distance stretched like an unbridgeable void? What peace could she give to a man she had destroyed with her choice, whose suffering was the direct result of her decision to value duty over love? And more terrifying still, what would it cost her to try? That evening at dinner, Fiona broke the months-long silence between herself and Friedrich. "I received a letter from Ireland today," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet clink of silverware on china. "News of Captain MacLeod." Friedrich set down his wineglass with deliberate care. "I specifically forbade correspondence regarding that man." This was not correspondence. This was news delivered through third parties. Unless you intend to forbid all communication with Ireland entirely, you cannot prevent such information from reaching me. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He is dying, Fiona continued, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. Not from his war wounds, but from despair. His brother believes he has lost his will to live. That is unfortunate, but not your concern. How can it not be my concern when I am the cause? You are the cause of nothing beyond your own melodrama. Friedrich's tone was cold, dismissive. Captain MacLeod is a grown man responsible for his own choices. If he chooses self-destruction over accepting reality, that is his failure, not yours. He loved me. Love is not an excuse for weakness. Is that what you told yourself after Anna died? The words emerged sharp as blades. That her love for you was weakness? That her desire to give you an heir despite medical advice was failure rather than devotion? Friedrich stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You will not speak of Anna. Why not? Her ghost lives in this castle as surely as I do. Two women who loved unwisely, who sacrificed themselves to men incapable of recognizing what they were given until it was destroyed. I recognize perfectly well what I was given. Friedrich's control was cracking, emotion seeping through the cracks. I was given a wife who performs her duties adequately while pining for a lover she cannot have. I was given an arrangement both parties agreed to with full knowledge of its terms. What I was not given, and what I never asked for, was theatrical displays of grief over choices freely made. Freely made, Fiona repeated, rising to face him across the table. There was nothing free about my choice. I chose between watching my family fall into complete ruin or binding myself to a stranger who offered money instead of affection. That is not freedom. That is desperation. And yet, you made it. You accepted my proposal. You took my name, my fortune, my protection. You cannot now claim victim status because the consequences of your choice are unpleasant. I am not claiming to be a victim. I am stating a fact. My choice is killing two people, James in Scotland and me in Bavaria, both of us dying slowly from the same wound, the knowledge that we sacrificed the only thing that truly mattered for things that matter not at all in the end. Friedrich moved around the table, stopping close enough that she could see genuine anger in his steel-grey eyes for the first time in their marriage. What would you have me do, Fiona? Release you? Grant you freedom to run to Scotland and throw yourself at a dying man's feet? Annul our marriage so you can play out this romantic tragedy to its bitter conclusion? The question hung in the air between them, sharp with challenge and something else. Fear, perhaps, or pain carefully disguised as anger. Yes, Fiona whispered. Yes, that is exactly what I want. Friedrich stared at her, his expression shifting through emotions too complex to name. Shock, betrayal, something that might have been hurt if he allowed himself such vulnerability. You are serious, completely. Release me, Friedrich, end this marriage. You will lose nothing you actually value. I manage your household adequately, yes, but any competent woman could do the same. I provide no heirs, no companionship, no affection. I am a placeholder, a function you could replace within months with someone who would perform the role without the inconvenient emotional complications I bring. And what would you do? Return to Ireland? Go to Scotland? Throw yourself on the mercy of a man too broken to save himself, let alone you? I would go to James and offer him the only thing I have left to give, the truth, an apology, the acknowledgement that I chose wrong, that duty was not worth this price, that I would undo everything if I could. You cannot undo what is done, no, but I can stop compounding the mistake. I can stop pretending that this existence is acceptable, that slow death by inches is somehow noble because it fulfills social obligations. Friedrich turned away, his hands clasped behind his back, his shoulders rigid with tension. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, stripped of anger but heavy with something else. I could give you what you ask. An annulment would be complicated but possible. We have not produced children. I could argue non-consummation or other grounds. The scandal would be significant but manageable. Hope flared in Fiona's chest, brief and terrifying. But I will not, Friedrich continued. Not because I am cruel, though you clearly believe me to be. Not because I wish to see you suffer, though your suffering is evident. but because granting you this would be participating in your destruction, and I am not willing to do that. You are already participating in my destruction by keeping me here. No. I am providing you structure, stability, protection from your own worst impulses. If I release you, you will go to Scotland. You will find Captain MacLeod dying or already dead. And then what? You will have destroyed your reputation, abandoned your social position, sacrificed everything I provided for what? A tragic reunion that changes nothing, a few final moments with a man who cannot be saved. Those moments would be worth more than years in this beautiful prison. That is exactly the kind of romantic delusion that killed Anna. Friedrich turned back to face her, his expression harder now, walls fully reconstructed. I will not enable your self-destruction the way I inadvertently enabled hers. You will remain here, fulfill your obligations, and eventually you will learn what I learned. That duty is the only reliable foundation for life. That emotion is temporary, fleeting, ultimately meaningless against the solid reality of practical responsibility. You learned nothing from Anna's death except how to armor yourself more completely against feeling anything. I learned that love kills, Friedrich said flatly. Anna died from love. Captain MacLeod is dying from love. And you are destroying yourself from love. Meanwhile, I endure. I function. I fulfill my responsibilities without being consumed by them. Which of us has chosen more wisely? Fiona stared at this man who measured everything by survival, who had convinced himself that existing was the same as living, who believed he had won some battle by simply refusing to feel what feeling would cost him. You have chosen to be alone, she said quietly, surrounded by people, legally bound to a wife, master of a magnificent estate, and utterly, completely alone. If that is wisdom, I want no part of it. She left the dining room without waiting for dismissal, climbed to her tower chambers, and locked the door behind her. That night Fiona made a decision. She could not leave Schloss Reichenbach. Weather and distance and legal constraints made escape impossible. But she could write to James one final time, risk Friedrich's discovery and anger, because silence was no longer bearable. She sat at her desk and composed the most honest letter she had ever written. My dearest James, I have learned you are in Scotland, recovering from your wounds, but failing to recover from the deeper injury I inflicted when I chose duty over love. I am trapped here, James, not merely by marriage contract, but by winter, by distance, by every practical consideration that governs our lives. I cannot come to you. I cannot offer you anything beyond words on paper that may arrive too late to matter, but I must speak these truths, even if you never read them, even if they change nothing. I chose wrong. Every day in this German castle confirms that truth. I thought I was being responsible, dutiful, selfless. I thought I was saving my family through noble sacrifice. I was wrong. I was a coward who used duty as an excuse to avoid the risk and struggle of real love. You offered me everything that mattered, and I rejected it for things that matter not at all. Security, status, the approval of a society that cares nothing for human hearts. I do not ask for forgiveness because I do not deserve it. I do not ask for rescue because none is possible. I ask only that you know this truth. If I could travel back to that October morning in Brennan Hall, I would refuse Friedrich's proposal. I would accept poverty, hardship, struggle, all of it, if it meant waking beside you each day. If it meant building a life together, rather than existing in separate prisons of our own making. If you are dying, James, please do not die believing I do not love you. Please do not die thinking my choice meant you were less valuable than money or status or any of the empty things I purchased with your heart. You were everything. You are everything. And I destroyed us both because I was too afraid, too conventional, too dutiful to recognize that some risks are worth taking, some struggles are worth fighting, and love, real love, matters more than survival. I am so sorry, my darling, for all of it, for every choice I made that led us here, for every moment you have suffered because of my cowardice. If you can, please live. Not for me, because I have no right to ask anything of you, but for yourself, because you deserve happiness, deserve love, deserve a life filled with more than grief and regret. And if you cannot live, if the wound I dealt you is too deep to heal, then know that you take part of me with you into whatever comes next. The best part. The only part worth keeping. I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you until the day I die, whether that is tomorrow or decades from now in this cold castle where love came to wither. Fiona. She sealed the letter, addressed it to James MacLeod, care of his brother's estate in Scotland, and the next morning gave it to a trusted servant with instructions to post it as soon as the roads cleared, regardless of Friedrich's potential discovery. Then she waited. January became February. The snow began to melt. Roads opened sporadically, allowing occasional communication with the world beyond the mountains. Fiona watched for responses, for news, for any indication that her letter had reached James or that his condition had changed. Nothing came. In early March, 14 months into her marriage to Friedrich, a final letter arrived. Not from James, not from Ireland, but from Scotland, from Laird Duncan MacLeod, James's brother. Fiona opened it in her tower room, her hands steady now because she already knew what it would say. Some knowledge comes not from words, but from the sudden absence of hope. Baroness von Reichenbach, it is my sorrowful duty to inform you that my brother, Captain James MacLeod, passed away on February 14th, 1873. His death was not from his war wounds, which had largely healed. The physicians could find no physical cause. His heart simply stopped, as if he had decided that continuing to beat required more effort than he could muster. He died peacefully in his sleep, at our family estate overlooking the highlands he loved. I was with him the night before. He was calm, more at peace than he had been in months. He asked me to ensure certain items were distributed according to his wishes. Among those items was a letter sealed and addressed to you. He wrote it the day before he died. I am enclosing it with this correspondence. He also left instructions that I should tell you something specific. He said, "Tell Fiona I died loving her, not from loving her, but while loving her. There is a difference. She must not carry my death as guilt. I would live my life exactly the same, love her exactly the same, even knowing how it would end. Love her was the only thing I ever did right. I do not know what passed between you and my brother, Baroness, but I know he loved you with a devotion I have rarely witnessed. Whatever choices were made, whatever circumstances separated you, please know that James held no bitterness, only love. May you find peace in that knowledge. Duncan MacLeod Laird of Glenarross." Fiona's hands shook as she set aside Duncan's letter and reached for the enclosed envelope. James's handwriting, his final words, written the day before his heart stopped beating. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. "My darling Fiona, your letter reached me yesterday. Shh. I have read it a dozen times, memorizing every word, holding it like the precious thing it is. You asked me to live. I tried, my love. For months after returning from Afghanistan, I tried to find some reason to continue, but everything felt hollow without you. Food had no taste, music had no beauty. The highlands I once loved seemed grey and empty. Then your letter arrived, and for one perfect day I felt alive again, not because you offered hope of reunion, because I know such hope is impossible, but because you spoke the truth. You admitted what I always believed, that our love mattered more than all the practical considerations that tore us apart. That knowledge is enough. It has to be enough. I am dying, Fiona. I feel it in my bones, in the increasing difficulty of drawing breath, in the way my heart struggles to maintain its rhythm. The physicians find nothing wrong, but I know my body is shutting down because I have stopped fighting it. I could fight. Perhaps I could live another 40 years through sheer stubbornness. But to what purpose? To grow old without you? To watch from distance as you fade in your German castle? To spend decades carrying this wound that never heals? No. I am choosing something different. Not suicide exactly, simply an ending on my own terms, while I still have your love to carry with me into whatever comes next. Please do not grieve for me beyond what grief naturally demands. I lived. I loved. I knew what it meant to be cherished by someone worth loving. Most people never experience that, never know that depth of connection. I was blessed, even if that blessing was temporary and ended in separation. You must live, Fiona. Truly live, not merely exist. Find some way to reclaim pieces of yourself from that marriage, from that castle, from the prison you built from duty and fear. You deserve more than slow death by inches. Promise me you will try. I release you from all guilt. I release you from all obligation. I release you from any burden you carry because of choices you made. And I tell you once more what I told you years ago beneath the oak tree at Brennan Hall. I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you beyond death itself, if such love is possible. Be happy if you can. Be at peace if you cannot, but be alive, my darling, for both of us. James. The letter fell from Fiona's hands as she collapsed to her knees on the cold stone floor. James was dead. Had died loving her. Had spent his final day reading her words, finding peace in her confession, then letting his heart stop because continuing required more strength than remaining broken had left him. She did not weep. She was beyond weeping. She simply knelt on the floor of her tower room, while the March wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the castle below, Friedrich went about his business, unaware that his wife had just lost the last connection to anything that made life feel real. Hours passed, the sun set, darkness filled the room. Still Fiona remained on her knees, James's letter clutched in her hand, her mind frozen on a single terrible truth. She had killed him, not with a weapon, not with direct action, but through the accumulated weight of choices made from fear and duty. She had chosen survival over love, and that choice had destroyed the only man who had ever truly seen her, valued her, loved her for who she was rather than what she could provide. When she finally stood, her legs numb from kneeling, her body cold from hours without movement, she moved to her writing desk and withdrew every letter, every memento, every ghost she had collected during her marriage. James's letters, the ring, Anna's journal that Margaret had given her, her own unsent correspondence, all the evidence of love sacrificed, lives destroyed, choices that could never be undone. She built a fire in the hearth, watching the flames grow strong and bright. Then one by one she began feeding the papers to the fire, not to destroy the evidence, not to hide from Friedrich or anyone else, but because she understood now that holding on to these ghosts was preventing her from making a final, necessary choice. James had asked her to live, truly live, not merely exist. She could not do that in Schloss Reichenbach. She could not do that bound to Friedrich. She could not do that playing the role of Baroness in a marriage built on duty and devoid of anything resembling human warmth. As the last letter burned, Fiona made her decision. She would leave, not to chase James's ghost, because James was gone beyond recall, not to reclaim some impossible happiness, because happiness was no longer the goal, but simply to stop participating in her own destruction, to refuse the slow death by inches that Friedrich believed was wisdom. The roads were open. Spring was coming. She had jewelry she could sell, skills she could use. She would return to Ireland or perhaps Scotland, find work as a governess or companion, live modestly but freely, exist on her own terms rather than someone else's contract. Friedrich could annul the marriage or not as he chose. She no longer cared about his approval or society's judgment. James had died believing she deserved to live. She would honor that belief by actually attempting to do so, regardless of cost or consequence. That night Fiona began packing. Not everything, just essentials. Documents. A few changes of clothes. The money she had carefully saved from household accounts over months. She would leave at dawn, when the servants were just waking, when Friedrich was still in his chambers, when no one would think to stop a baroness taking an early morning walk in the gardens. She would simply walk through the gates and keep walking, down the mountain, to the village, to the railway station, away from this beautiful prison where love came to die. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. At midnight, as Fiona was hiding her packed bag beneath her bed, someone knocked on her chamber door. Friedrich's voice, urgent in a way she had never heard. "Fiona, open the door, please." She opened it to find her husband standing in the corridor, still fully dressed despite the late hour, his expression troubled in ways his usual control could not mask. "What is wrong?" she asked. "I received word from my solicitor in Berlin." He held out a telegram, his hand trembling slightly. "There has been an accident. A railway investment I made, a bridge collapse. Dozens dead. The company will face lawsuits, criminal investigations. My fortune, Fiona, everything I built. It may all be destroyed." She stared at this man who had purchased her with £12,000, who had measured everything by financial security and practical success, now facing the complete collapse of the very foundations he had built his life upon. "I am sorry," she said, and meant it. "I need you." The words came out harsh, desperate, utterly unlike Friedrich's usual measured tones. "I need your help navigating this crisis. You are intelligent, capable, the only person in this household I can trust to understand the complexities involved." Fiona looked at her husband, really looked at him for the first time in months, saw not the cold aristocrat, but a man facing ruin, reaching out for help from the only person available, even though he had spent their marriage maintaining rigid distance. This was her moment. She could refuse, explain that she was leaving, walk away from him and this castle and everything it represented. Let him face his crisis alone as he had forced her to face her grief alone. Or she could help, could choose compassion over resentment, could demonstrate the humanity he had never shown her, but perhaps desperately needed now. She thought of James, of his final letter, of his request that she live and find peace if happiness was impossible. What would living actually mean, running away from every difficulty, or choosing to act with grace even when grace had not been shown to her? "I will help you," Fiona said quietly, "on one condition. Name it. After this crisis passes, whether you are ruined or saved, you will grant me my freedom. You will annul this marriage and release me from obligations I can no longer bear. Do you agree?" Friedrich stared at her, understanding passing between them without words. She was not threatening or bargaining. She was simply stating terms for what little remained of their arrangement. "I agree," he said finally. "Help me through this, and I will set you free." They worked through the night and the days that followed. Fiona managing correspondence, dealing with solicitors, navigating the complex legal and financial challenges that Friedrich's railway disaster had created. She was brilliant, capable, exactly what the situation demanded. And Friedrich, stripped of his usual rigid control by crisis, became almost human. He thanked her. He listened to her advice. He showed gratitude and even, occasionally, something resembling warmth. 3 weeks later, the crisis resolved. Not perfectly. Friedrich lost significant portions of his fortune, but retained enough to maintain his estate and social position. The worst outcomes had been avoided through careful legal maneuvering and strategic settlements. On the day the final papers were signed, Friedrich called Fiona to his study. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," he said. "Your intelligence and steady nerve saved me from complete ruin. You owe me nothing beyond what you promised, my freedom." Friedrich nodded slowly. "I have contacted my solicitor. The annulment papers are being prepared. On grounds of incompatibility and failure to produce heirs. It will take several months, but it will be done. Thank you. Before you leave Schloss Reichenbach, I must tell you something." Friedrich moved to the window, his posture weary. "I received word yesterday about Captain MacLeod." Fiona's breath caught. "I already know. He died in February, yes, but do you know the circumstances, the full truth?" "He died peacefully." His heart simply stopped. "He died the day after your letter reached him." Friedrich turned to face her. "I had the timeline investigated. Your letter arrived on February 13th. He read it, wrote his response, and died the following morning. The physicians believe he simply let go, having finally received the acknowledgement he needed." Fiona felt something crack inside her chest. James had waited, had held on until her letter arrived, until he knew she loved him, until he had her truth. Then he had chosen to stop fighting, to end his suffering on his own terms. "You killed him with kindness," Friedrich said, not cruelly, but a simple observation. "Your confession gave him permission to die. He had been waiting for that permission, consciously or unconsciously." "I know." Fiona's voice was hollow. "I have carried that knowledge since I received news of his death." "Good. You should carry it, not as guilt, but as understanding of what love actually costs." Friedrich's expression was complex, layered with emotions he rarely showed. Anna died from love. Captain MacLeod died from love. You are dying from love. And I have spent years trying to avoid that fate by refusing to love at all. Have you succeeded? No. The admission seemed to cost him something. I loved Anna, though I could not show it. I loved her desperately, terribly, and when she died, I convinced myself that my love had killed her. That if I had been colder, more distant, more insistent that she terminate the pregnancy, she would have lived. So I armored myself completely, determined never to feel that pain again. And did it work? It kept me safe from grief, but also from living. You were right about that. I exist, but do not live. I function, but do not feel. I have built a magnificent fortress and locked myself inside it, alone. Fiona studied this man who had purchased her, controlled her, imprisoned her in beautiful rooms and rigid expectations. For the first time, she saw not a villain but another casualty of the same battle she and James had lost, someone who had chosen differently but ended up just as broken. "What will you do after I leave?" she asked. "Continue as I have. Manage my estates, rebuild my fortune, maintain my obligations." Friedrich managed a bitter smile. "What else is there for a man who has forgotten how to be anything beyond a function? You could learn. It is not too late. It is far too late. But perhaps you are not too late. You are young still. You have years ahead of you. Do not waste them as I have wasted mine." The annulment papers were finalized in June of 1873. Fiona signed them in Friedrich's study, watched him add his own signature, and felt the legal bonds of their marriage dissolve with the scratch of pen on paper. She left Schloss Reichenbach on a summer morning, carrying a single bag and a bank draft for £5,000 that Friedrich insisted she take, despite her protests. A settlement, he called it. Payment for services rendered during the railway crisis. She travelled to Scotland first, to James's grave in the Highlands overlooking Glen Arros. She stood at the simple headstone, reading the inscription, "Captain James MacLeod, 1842-1873. He died loving, not beloved son or hero or any conventional epitaph." Just those 3 words that captured the essential truth of James's life and death. Fiona knelt at the grave and spoke aloud the words she needed to say. "I am sorry I was not brave enough. I am sorry I chose wrong. I am sorry you paid the price for my fear." She touched the cold stone, imagining she could somehow reach through earth and time to the man beneath. "But I will try to honor your final request. I will try to live, truly live, for both of us. I do not know if I can be happy, but I will try to be free." She stayed in Scotland for 6 months, working as a governess for a merchant family in Edinburgh. She lived simply, modestly, earning her own way for the first time in her life. It was hard, humbling, occasionally lonely. It was also honest in ways her life as a baroness had never been. In December, she received a letter from Margaret. Friedrich had remarried, a practical match to a German widow of appropriate age and temperament. The new Baroness von Reichenbach was efficient, dutiful, and utterly conventional. Exactly what Friedrich needed. Margarete also wrote that Friedrich had established a charitable foundation in Anna's name, funding medical care for expectant mothers. A small gesture, but perhaps a sign that some capacity for feeling remained beneath the armor he had built. Fiona eventually returned to Ireland, to Brennan Hall, which her younger cousin had inherited and was managing well. She lived in the dower house on the estate grounds, helping with estate management, teaching the cousin's children, existing quietly on the margins of the life she had once tried to save. She never married again. She had offers over the years, respectable men who saw a beautiful widow of good breeding and modest means. She declined them all politely but firmly. Not because she was pining for James exactly. He was gone and pining would not resurrect him, but because she had learned that marriage for practical reasons was a form of death, and she had died once already. She would not volunteer for that death again. She lived for 40 more years, watching seasons change over the Irish hills, watching her cousin's children grow and marry and have children of their own. She read voraciously, travelled occasionally, and found small pleasures in gardens and books and the company of friends who accepted her unconventional independence. She was not happy, not in the uncomplicated way young people dream of happiness, but she was free, and freedom, she discovered, was its own form of grace. On her deathbed in 1913, at the age of 67, Fiona asked her cousin's daughter to bring her a small locked box from her writing desk. Inside was James's ring, the only thing she had kept from those terrible years. She held it in her palm, feeling its familiar weight, and smiled sadly. "I chose wrong," she whispered to the young woman holding her hand. "I chose duty over love, security over passion, survival over living, and it destroyed 3 lives, mine, his, and the man I married." "You could not have known," the young woman said gently. "No, but I should have trusted love over fear. That is the lesson, child. When you face impossible choices, choose love. It may destroy you, but at least you will have lived before you died." Those were Fiona's last words. She passed quietly that evening, the ring still clutched in her hand, her expression peaceful in a way it had rarely been during life. They buried her in the Brennan family plot, beside her parents, beneath an oak tree that had stood for 200 years, the same oak where she and James had carved their initials so long ago. The letters were still visible in the bark, scarred over, but permanent. JM plus FB, a promise made and broken, a love sacrificed to duty, a choice that could never be undone. And perhaps that was the cruelest truth of all. Some choices echo through decades, destroy multiple lives, and teach lessons that come too late to save the people who learned them. Fiona had chosen duty. James had died from her choice. Friedrich had remained imprisoned by his own walls. And all 3 had paid prices that could never be repaid, only endured until death finally offered the mercy that life had denied. This was not a story of redemption or healing. This was simply what happened when people made impossible choices in impossible circumstances, when duty demanded everything and gave nothing back, when love proved insufficient against the cold machinery of social expectation and practical necessity. 3 lives, 3 prisons, 3 deaths, some quick and others agonizingly slow. And the only lesson worth learning, the only truth worth carrying forward, was this: some sacrifices are not noble, some duties are not worth honoring, and sometimes choosing love over survival is not romantic foolishness, but the only way to remain human in a world that demands we become something less. Fiona learned that truth too late, but she learned it nonetheless, carried it through 40 years of freedom purchased at devastating cost, and whispered it with her dying breath to a young woman who might, perhaps, make better choices when her own impossible moment arrived. What did you think of this tragic tale? Have you ever faced an impossible choice between duty and desire? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel for more aristocratic dramas that explore the devastating cost of the choices we make. And hit that like button if you believe that some sacrifices are too great, some prices too high, and some loves too precious to abandon for anything the world might offer in exchange. Thank you for listening, and may you never have to choose as Fiona did. Until next time.